Yeah, so I'm Leo. I've been recruiting in Finland and other countries around the world for about like 10 years now. I've been recruiting for a lot of different roles, everything from sort of quite deep sort of biotech roles to SaaS gaming. I currently work in defense at the moment. I've worked both in-house, so being employed by a company to recruit for them, and as a consultant. So many companies have come to me to find candidates for them. Um, but yeah, I say I've been doing this for 10 years, essentially pure recruitment for a lot of different types of roles.
Is there a possibility to ask about salary requirements? Or is it okay to say something like, I'm not interested in a big salary because I'm more interested in the work experience? So it's a person who is just starting a career in the industry.
You you can. It's not very useful. So the reason we ask about salary requirements usually isn't to sort of filter people out, is to manage expectations because we will have a budget. And what we want to see is that, like, basically, we don't want to get to the end of the process and find out that it was a pointless process because someone wants too much, that sort of thing. I know there are some people out there who there's a feeling, let's say, that if you ask for less, it's going to help you get the job. In my experience, if a company's sort of working like that, that's a massive red flag for me. Like it's a like if a company's sort of looking at candidates and going, well, let's just go with the cheapest one. To my mind, that's a red flag. I wouldn't ever work for a company that did that. And so, if a company is asking you what your salary request is, you can always turn around and say, well, what's your budget? That's fine, but it might be that the person you're talking to doesn't know the budget. Especially in a large sort of corporation, it could be that the budget, has been decided, but it hasn't been communicated. It could be that they're collecting sort of salary requests to see is their budget sort of does it make sense? And so it might be that you actually need to be able to say what you like, what you want. And so you need to have a number or a range that you're comfortable with. And again, this is not easy. This is tough. It's nerve-wracking. It's stressful. But I think, if someone's asking you a salary range, turning around and saying, "Oh, I'm not interested in the money. I'm just interested in the work," it doesn't. I don't think it doesn't give the vibe that you're probably expecting. Because to me, it says I haven't really thought about it. And you say, what? Then to me, that says you haven't really thought about a really kind of a key part of the role. And so if someone comes to me, like what I always say to candidates is like, if you want to talk about money, I want to talk about money because it means you're interested. And I think as well, like if someone says, actually, I don't care about the money, it's just about the work, it's not true. Because if the company turns around and goes, okay, great, we're not paying you, you're still going to do it? No, you're not going to do that. So clearly there is a level of money there. What I think is meant by this is, hey, I'm kind of flexible. I don't want it to be an issue. But for that, you could say, hey, this is my range. I don't know what yours is. Like, is this sort of within range? Let's say I'm happy to be flexible, but this is kind of what I'm looking at.
I was once in an interview process where a person said, I actually sold my startup. I never need to work for money anymore. And this person got hired later for the role.
Okay.
It was interesting. How to bring up diverse types of experiences that are supportive of the role that one is interviewing for, but that might not be a requirement in the job post.
As in experiences that are relevant for the role, but aren't specifically listed. That's interesting because I would assume if they're relevant for the role, they'll be at least somehow mentioned in the job description because you will know that they're relevant. Because what you need to do is you need to look at the job description because the job description is going to tell you what the company is actually looking for. That's what's relevant to them. And so if you have experiences that are relevant based on the job description, absolutely bring them up. And I mean, you can say, hey, actually, in a way you can say, look, I'm going to bring up an experience. It might not seem relevant initially, but like, stay with me. You can say, actually, I've done this thing. It's, on the face of it, it doesn't look the same, but actually it's exactly the same. I've had someone moving from accounting to sort of database administration. And one of the things they said was like, hey, I've been working in accounting. It doesn't seem super relevant for database administration, but actually what I was doing was I was managing all of the essentially the documentation we used for payroll. So I was actually managing fairly large databases of really sensitive information. And what you're looking for is essentially exactly what I was doing within payroll. So I think that the key thing is to tie it really, really quite clearly to the job description, because that's what the company is going to be looking for, and that's kind of what they're probably going to be checking against.
When an interviewer asks a question, should the interviewee answer instantly or pause for some seconds before answering?
I think either is fine. In a way, there's a lot of nuance here because, say, for example, with some roles, like sales roles, they want someone who's super confident and who can, so in some cases you will need to answer immediately, but they also want to make sure that the answer you're giving is relevant. And so I think like if you're confident in your answer, yeah, answer immediately. But I think it's absolutely fine to take those few seconds. And I mean, you can even say, hey, I'm going to take just a moment to collect my thoughts because this is like you say, it's a really interesting question. I want to give a good answer. I'm going to take just a couple of moments, and that's absolutely fine because it actually shows that you're willing to sort of respect the question in a way. I'm really guilty of just launching into answers and interviews. Like I don't pause. I have no chill. I answer immediately. I'm really, really bad at sort of taking a few moments, and I could probably do that much better. Um, so I think I say either are fine, but it really does depend on kind of you. It depends on the role. It depends on what you want to show the interviewer.
Availability to start the work. Can a holiday be negotiated? We are at the start of the summer season, so some school holidays need to be handled by those who
Yeah.
have kids. What can be realistically negotiated?
I mean, you can always ask. Essentially, each company is different, and each company has different policies about holidays. Um, I know someone who started a role recently. They were in the role for 2 days, then had a week's holiday, and then went back to work. So there can be a lot of flexibility. I think the important thing is to bring it up early. Because what you don't want is to go through a process where the company is saying, so we need someone who can start right away, and these are going to be the deadlines. And then suddenly at the end of the process for you to say, oh, by the way, I need like a month off. So if I think like the important thing again, bring it up early and see, what the company says. And then you need to decide kind of how vital is it that you take this. For example, if it's a summer holiday with kids, yeah, you probably need to take that. There's nothing you can do. If it's sort of, like you were planning on maybe visiting somewhere that can be moved, it might be that the company says, well, actually, like if you were going to start the role, we need you to, like on site for these months, and you go, okay, cool, maybe I delay it, but bring it up early and discuss.
What would you advise to try to answer the question correctly or rather be oneself and just say things as they are?
There are very few questions with correct answers unless you're actually talking about sort of like factually accurate answers. I'd always recommend you be yourself. The reason being is if you get the job, that's who you're going to have to be. I've worked with startups where um, we had someone who applied and then they started and the company reached out to us and went, hey, they're a completely different person. They're nowhere near as confident. They're really quiet. They don't really talk in meetings like what happened. And we reached out to them and they said, well, actually, I knew that I had to be super confident to get the job, but I'm not. I don't really like sort of being really extroverted. And the company was like, well, okay, the reason we hired you is because of who you were in the interviews, the information you gave, the way you said you handled, um, situations. So I'd always recommend being who you are. And yes, it might be that you don't get a job because of it, but it might, but like if you get a job based on like not being who you are, you might, lose that job, which to my mind is worse because, especially in a place like Finland and especially in a place like Helsinki with a really small community, like news gets around. So yeah, my advice is always to be who you are because, that means they can actually decide if they want you, not the person you're trying to be.
Would it be a good idea to mention your experience of burnout in interviews? Does it give a negative impression?
Really good question, really difficult question, really difficult answers. I said the bottom line is you need to be comfortable with talking about it. And if you're not comfortable talking about it, I probably wouldn't bring it up because the second you bring up burnout, what the company will probably want to know is, okay, great. How have you managed it and how are you making sure it's not happening again? And if you're comfortable talking about it, that should be not easy to do, but you will probably have answers because you've been through it and you know the signs and that there may be things that you've done to manage that. If you're not comfortable talking about it, the way that you bring that up will be less confident and it might actually create doubt. But I say that the bottom line is you have to be confident in talking about stuff if you bring it up. And it's a really like I'm not going to say either way whether you should bring it up because it's 100% a personal choice. I know some people who have decided not to bring it up and it's worked well. I know some people who've actually brought it up as kind of a superpower. They said, hey, like the company said, hey, like what's your superpower? And I know someone went, oh, I had burnout, and so I know the signs. I have all these things that I do to make sure it doesn't happen. I'm really good at, setting boundaries, that sort of thing. And the company was like, great, that's amazing. You're clearly not a risk. But it completely depends on you. I'm not going to advise either way.
A final question from me. Um, we were talking about it on LinkedIn a little bit that nowadays companies also have interviews with psychologists. So
Yeah.
what is like, I was wondering, a good recruiter could also ask similar questions that a psychologist does. So what is the difference between these two types of interviews?
Yeah, so some companies have sort of psychometric tests, that sort of stuff. The reason you bring in a psychologist is that they're actually qualified to understand and interpret the results. Um, unless a recruiter has done training or has a degree in psychology or essentially the necessary qualifications, it's just results. And so, I say, some companies decide that this is relevant for them. They want to sort of assess this during the process. Some decide that they don't. Um, I've never been part of a company that has done this, but I know there are some companies that really, really believe in it. But essentially, the difference is that a psychologist actually is trained to give, like, they're trained to interpret the results they've been given.
So it's always in relation to these tests that are done before.
Usually, I think like yeah, as I say, there are some companies who'll have a psychologist, and likely what they're checking is sort of are you sort of like do they feel that you're sort of essentially capable on a psychological level of doing the role. Maybe the role is really sort of like emotionally demanding. If you're going to be, for example, dealing with like there are roles, for example, in customer support where you might be dealing with people who've experienced a lot of trauma. Now, you might bring in a psychologist for that process because you want to make sure that someone has actually given enough thought to kind of what that might be like and the mental strain on that. It might be that you're dealing with really sensitive information, like at the national security level. And again, you might bring in a psychologist there because you want to make sure that someone is okay with the pressure that they've kind of thought about it.